right, welcome everyone to today's deep dive. And today we're going to be looking into this uh, powerful volcanic eruption that happened back in 1831. It had a big impact on the global climate, but for almost 2 centuries, no one really knew where it came from. And we're basing all this on a really interesting article called Pasted Text that came out recently. So without further ado, let's jump right in.
Yeah, so this eruption, it took place during what's known as the Little Ice Age, one of the coldest periods we've seen on Earth in the last 10,000 years. And you can just imagine, temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere were already low, and then boom, this massive eruption happens, sending them plummeting even further. The consequences, well, they must have been pretty severe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of hard to even fathom. So how did scientists finally crack this mystery? How'd they find the source of this eruption after all this time?
Well, the answer was frozen in time. Literally, it was found in ice cores from Greenland. These ice cores are like these incredible natural archives, trapping particles from the atmosphere layer by layer.
Oh, wow. So each layer is like a snapshot of Earth's atmosphere at a specific moment in time.
Exactly. It's like a cake. Each layer represents a year, and by analyzing the composition of those layers, scientists can basically travel back in time and reconstruct the atmospheric conditions.
That's amazing. So what did they find in the layer for 1831?
Well, in this case, they found this distinct layer with sulfur isotopes, ash grains, even these tiny little shards of volcanic glass.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'm guessing they needed some pretty high-tech methods to analyze all those particles, right?
Absolutely. Scientists used a bunch of different methods, things like mass spectrometry to study those sulfur isotopes. They even did this meticulous microscopic analysis of the volcanic glass shards, because each shard, it has this unique shape, almost like a fingerprint, that can help pinpoint where it came from.
So they had the evidence, the technology, but how'd they put it all together to finally ID the culprit?
Well, the first clue came from looking at where all this fallout landed. Ice cores showed way higher sulfur fallout in Greenland compared to Antarctica in 1831. That pretty much told them that the volcano had to be somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere.
Makes sense. I mean, the closer you are to the source, the more fallout you'd expect, right?
Exactly. But knowing the general location wasn't enough, they needed a match. So they took those tiny ash and glass shards from the ice core and compared their chemical composition to samples from volcanoes all around the world.
Like a global volcano fingerprint database? That's pretty cool. Did that analysis point to any particular region right away?
Yeah, they found the closest matches in samples from Japan and the Kuril Islands. But Japan has a really well-documented history of volcanic eruptions, and none of them quite lined up. However, when they started looking at the samples from the Kuril Islands, they found an incredible match with a volcano called Zavaritskii. It's on this remote island called Simushir Island.
Wow. I bet that was a huge moment for the research team. To finally crack a mystery that had stumped scientists for nearly 2 centuries.
Absolutely. And to confirm it, they used radiocarbon dating on tephra deposits, which is basically volcanic ash found on Simushir Island. And guess what? The dates lined up perfectly with the 1831 eruption.
Case closed. So we have this remote volcano, Zavaritskii, suddenly taking center stage after being quiet for so long. But before we get into how this eruption affected the whole world, let's talk about Zavaritskii itself. What did we know about it before all of this?
Well, before this discovery, Zavaritskii was pretty much off the radar when it came to volcanic activity. The last time it was known to erupt was way back in 800 BC. It's like this volcano was slumbering for centuries, and then, bam, it erupts with enough force to actually impact the entire global climate. Really makes you realize just how unpredictable these powerful geological forces can be.
Almost like it was waiting for the perfect moment to make a grand entrance. So now we know who the culprit is. Let's look at how this eruption sent shockwaves across the globe. We know it made the Little Ice Age even colder, but how did it impact people's daily lives?
The effects were pretty significant and, sadly for many, devastating. Remember all that sulfur dioxide we talked about earlier? That's a major player in disrupting the climate. It gets blasted into the atmosphere during an eruption and can block sunlight, leading to a cooling effect on the planet.
So basically, this eruption threw a blanket of sulfur dioxide over the Earth, making the already cold conditions of the Little Ice Age even worse.
Exactly. And this cooling effect had a domino effect that went way beyond just a drop in temperature. Less sunlight meant plants couldn't photosynthesize as well, leading to widespread crop failures. These failures, coupled with existing political and social issues, led to devastating famines in regions like India, Japan, and even parts of Europe. Millions of people were affected by this one volcanic event.
It really hits home that even something happening in a remote corner of the world can have a ripple effect across the entire planet.
Absolutely. It shows just how interconnected everything really is.
And speaking of global events, you mentioned earlier that Zavaritskii wasn't the only volcano making headlines during this period. There were 3 other major eruptions between 1808 and 1835 that also played a role in ending the Little Ice Age. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about these other eruptions and how they fit into this complex puzzle of climate change.
Yeah, for sure. The 1831 eruption of Zavaritskii was really just one piece of the puzzle. We've got 2 others that are well known and have been studied extensively. The eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia in 1815, and the Coseguina eruption in Nicaragua in 1835.
Oh yeah, Tambora. That's the one that caused the year without a summer in 1816, right?
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling to think that one eruption could have such a widespread impact on global weather patterns. So what about Coseguina? What made that eruption stand out?
Well, the Coseguina eruption, while not as globally impactful as Tambora, was still a significant event. It created these massive ash columns that shot high into the atmosphere and caused widespread disruption in Central America. It also had a noticeable cooling effect on the Northern Hemisphere, though not as severe as Tambora.
Okay, so we've got Zavaritskii, Tambora, and Coseguina. That leaves us with one last eruption, the one from 1808 or 1809. What can you tell us about this mysterious event?
That's where things get a little more interesting. Even though we know a major eruption happened around 1888, 1809, based on things like ice core data and climate records, we still haven't figured out where it came from.
A true volcanic cold case. Are there any leading theories or suspects in this geological whodunit?
There are a few candidates, mostly located in the tropics. Eruptions in the tropics tend to have a bigger impact on global climate because of the way air circulates around the planet. So scientists are digging into historical records, ice core data, even tree ring data to try and narrow down the possibilities. It's a fascinating puzzle, and it shows us just how much we still don't know about Earth's history.
It really makes you wonder how many other massive eruptions might be hidden in the historical record, just waiting to be discovered. But for now, let's get back to the impact of these eruptions on the world. We've discussed the climate effects, but what about the societal, economic, and cultural consequences?
The impact of these eruptions, especially Tambora, went way beyond just colder temperatures. Remember, less sunlight meant less food, leading to shortages and higher prices. This created economic hardship and social unrest in many parts of the world.
It's like a domino effect, one event setting off a chain reaction across the globe.
Yeah.
Did these eruptions leave any lasting cultural or artistic impacts?
Oh, definitely. The year without a summer after Tambora is believed to have influenced art and literature. Those gloomy skies and unusual weather patterns might have inspired some of the dark and dramatic themes we see in the works of artists and writers from that time.
It's amazing to think that these eruptions, so seemingly distant from human affairs, could have such a profound effect on our culture and creativity. So we've unmasked the 1831 eruption, explored the other major eruptions of this era, and delved into their far-reaching consequences. But there's one more crucial aspect we need to discuss: preparedness. What can we learn from these past eruptions, and how can we apply that knowledge to face potential future events?
That's a really important point. We often get caught up in the science and the data, but we can't forget about the human side of things. These eruptions, they didn't just impact the climate, they impacted real people's lives in a very real way.
Exactly, and we've talked about the famines and hardships, but are there any accounts that really capture the human cost of these events?
There are, and they're really quite powerful. Diaries, letters, even oral histories passed down through generations. They paint this really vivid picture of what people went through. The struggles, the ways they adapted, it really highlights the resilience of these communities in the face of these overwhelming events.
It's a good reminder that behind all the data, there are human stories of loss, resilience, and adaptation.
Absolutely. And these stories also remind us that while we can try to understand and prepare for eruptions, there's always going to be a limit to our control. It's a humbling experience to realize that we're just a small part of these grand natural processes.
It really puts things into perspective. This deep dive has been incredible. We've solved the mystery of the 1831 eruption, explored other major eruptions, and even delved into the world of unsolved volcanic mysteries. As we wrap up, what's the one thing you'd like our listeners to take away from today's conversation?
I think the most important takeaway is this. Volcanic eruptions, while potentially disruptive, are a natural part of our planet. They've shaped our world and continue to remind us of how interconnected everything is. By studying these events, we can gain a deeper understanding of Earth and our place within it.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating journey into the world of volcanoes. Until our next deep dive, keep those minds curious and stay safe out there.